Hello to all of our listeners, and welcome back to The Parent Solution, your one-stop shop for all things educational. Today is a guest episode, and I have Mr. Francisco Cepeda with me. Francisco has over 12 years in education as a teacher and as a school counselor. This total obviously includes experience in all levels. That means from K all the way up to grade 12. Mr. Cepeda has counseled students from all backgrounds and diverse histories, including trauma and social emotional skills, as well as higher education. The pressure that some students place on their self-worth, he says, to succeed is absolutely eye-opening. And he has quite a few insights and stories to share with us today. So welcome, Francisco. I'm excited to have you.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, first of all.
Of course, absolutely. We're really glad to have you here. Perhaps it would be a good idea to maybe share a little bit about your experiences in education, maybe some of the more memorable ones that stick out over the past 12 years.
Some of the memorable moments? Yes. Okay. Well, as you said, you pretty much nailed it in the bio about me. I have been going on year 12. Most recently, I decided to do virtual school counseling. So in addition to that, my wife and I are homeschooling our son, who is a rising second grader. So he'll be in the second grade. And it's just phenomenal. We've seen so much growth. But going back to me, I would say that the virtual school counseling realm was refreshing from the sense that I didn't have to do other duties as assigned that you normally see under the typical school district contract. In other words, I actually got to counsel. From my experience, I graduated from a K-CREP program, which apparently has the highest accreditation standards, and it holds all school counselors to the highest standards. And so with that, I was taught in grad school to advocate. That one word kept ringing in my ear, and we even had a end of semester project where the professor had us decorate a plant, and the plant was a metaphor for our students. And on the base, she had us write the word advocate. And so at the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought, okay, this is pretty funny, whatever, given that I'm not very crafty. But then going into the actual school system, I definitely saw how important that one word was going to be, especially when from what I studied compared to the actual experience of school counseling, I saw just how important it was. And needless to say, I definitely had some run-ins with administration as far as advocating for the roles that school counselors should do, bound by the American School Counseling Association standards here in the United States, in addition to Texas, where I'm based out of, where we also have a very rigorous standard for what school counselors can and should be doing. So a specific story, I would say that with administration at one particular school district, I'm all about team playing. I'm all about collaboration, but I'm also about doing my job and to the best of my ability and what we spent all this money for in grad school. And so I noticed that we were doing things like lunch duty, parking duty, and quote unquote other duties as assigned. And so it got to the point where thankfully I had two other partners with me. So we had to collaborate, and we presented a program to the local state program called Building a Counseling Program from the Ground Up. And so in this field, you have to have data. And so we collected the data to see the effectiveness for our program. So that was one thing which advocacy came into mind. But as you alluded to earlier, you said the tremendous pressure that students put on themselves. So then I was at another district a little bit farther north from where I am currently. And in this particular school district, it was all about college. The parents were heavily invested, heavily involved. And it was my first year as a high school counselor, which I'll never do again. Talk about PTSD. I mean, it was eye-opening. Unfortunately, everything that I learned about how a school counseling program should run went out the window. It was all about schedule changes. It was all constantly on your butt, Sorry to be frank, but literally that's what it was. It
Mhm.
was just a very thankless job. I felt like a very clerical, where I had to essentially change schedules all day and go by the master schedule and things that I had no training for. And I felt highly unqualified, especially when some of the students that I was to counsel knew more about it than I did. So I felt very incompetent, and it was very well known how incompetent I was when uh, some of these students would actually request, and their parents would request for them to see other counselors who had more years of experience and were all about it. And sadly, in this field, you're divided into one or two camps. You're either all heart or you're all head. And unfortunately for me, at the high school level, I was all heart, and I wasn't enough head. And so that was very detrimental to my position, because I'll never forget this one instant where I asked a student how he was doing. And it was almost like deer in the headlights look like, well, why are you asking me that? Just get me my classes, get me what I need. That's what I need. I don't need you to ask me how I'm doing. So that was one incident. Another incident was about something the deadline had passed. And the student came in with the parent, because I kept telling the student, the deadline is passed. The deadline is passed. So
Mhm.
the parent comes in with the student. The student, I gave the same answer.
The
And so
deadline
what happens? I'm
has
sorry?
I said the deadline has passed. You gave the parent the
Yeah.
same answer.
And so what does the parent do? She looks at her daughter. She looks right at me. She said, well, that's fine. We'll go to the assistant principal and we'll get this done. So that was the kind of district that I worked in. It was a constant stress, and I don't miss that particular district at all. It was a horrible experience. And it was I felt I wasn't supported at all. And of course, there's
Mhm.
always two sides to every story. So I'm sure that they would rave about me too. But the reality is how can you go into a field? This is the only field. This is my one gripe. I love the profession, but you don't go to medical school and are told to work on a car, right? No, you go into the trade. If you want to become a mechanic, if you want to become a mechanical engineer, there's everything specific to it. However, this
Mhm.
is the one and only field that I can think of, and of course, this is just my experience, where you go in, you're taught one thing, but then you come out into the real world and you're told to do something completely different, which goes back to my other story. So I'm backtracking. One of when I was studying this, when it was close to my year finishing, we had to do a practicum, which
Mhm.
basically what that means is you go to school, you interview. One of the assignments was just to interview a school counselor, head school counselor, to see what their take is on
Right.
things. And I'll never forget what this gentleman told me. He said, I had my binder in hand, ready to take notes, yeah, to just for an assignment, and he just laughed it off, kind of cynically, and he said, "Oh, son, believe me, what's in that book, just throw it out into the trash, because what you learn in grad school is not the same as what you're going to get when you're actually in
Mhm.
the field." So
Right.
it's just very demoralizing. But now I know more than ever why it's so important that school counselors advocate.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. I mean, that was definitely a lot. I'm certainly interested in like further takes on you and your wife homeschooling your son. I think that's an amazing undertaking. I'm sure that you have run into some challenges at this point. You said he's going into grade three, right?
That he's going to second grade. Yes, that's correct.
Into second grade. Yeah. Okay. So going into grade two, how long have you been homeschooling?
This was our first year. He went to private school the first year, and it was great. He
Mhm.
had a phenomenal kindergarten teacher. But what wound up happening was my wife and I decided to go into our own business, because I was getting burned out from
For
all
all the
those
reasons
stories.
that we've just had a chat about. Perhaps some of our,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I was already burned out, and so my wife
Mhm.
said we had enough funds at the time to say, okay, well, why don't you just take a sabbatical and I'll homeschool him. So my wife and I decided to homeschool our son while we traveled to the Northeast and visit and give him actual hands-on history lessons
Mhm.
by visiting museums along the Northeast.
Amazing. It's an
Yeah,
awesome
so
opportunity.
it was a great opportunity. It was real practical, hands-on. And so we did that. And in the time, the pros was that at first he thought it was weird because he's a social butterfly. He always makes friends wherever we go. So he definitely made some friends through a trampoline park, but actually getting into the curriculum, it was overwhelming what's out there. And then to find out just the litany of resources and different programs that my wife and I sifted through. So finally we settled on one particular program and we did it, and we found out just the applications of it. We found out that he loves math. I don't know where he got that from because my wife and I aren't the best math whizzes. So he loves math, and the reading, it was more of a struggle, and it continues to be a little more struggle. But I would say the advantage of homeschool is that it gives you the flexibility to travel, to do those real life history applications. And when you go to the store and you just find out about, you teach things like tax, sales tax, and budgeting and things of that nature. So it gave my wife the flexibility to teach him, to spend more time with him, because just in my experience at the public school, it just wasn't the best. And my wife and I didn't feel that was conducive for him.
Hmm.
And so that's why one of the main reasons we decided to homeschool. And we're going to go on year 2 of him homeschooling.
That's exciting stuff. Clearly making the decision to go to year two. Obviously, year one paid off in some dividends.
For
And
sure.
I'm sure that it had some challenges and whatnot. But thank you for sharing, yeah, a bit about your homeschooling journey. I know that one of the reasons that parents choose to homeschool is exactly what you said. The public school system is not cutting it anymore. And I mean, you saw that firsthand, even just as a school guidance counselor. You obviously saw that firsthand. Now, I know that, when we chatted before, you were talking about some things with technology and the difficulties of your job, per se, but that you felt like that your job was made a little bit more difficult by the overuse of technology. I wondered if you care to share any of your opinions on that as to what you saw in public school and maybe why that might be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think obviously technology, which I would never denigrate it or speak ill of it, in the sense that obviously what we're doing right now is thanks to technology. And it, especially during the pandemic, it made so much possible. And out of something so bad that affected everyone worldwide came something so good,
Mm-hmm.
like couples starting businesses and startup businesses and all that. But at any rate, going back to the overuse of technology in education, I definitely saw that. Obviously, I grew up in the '80s, going to elementary school, and again, I'm a product of private and public school, so I do have experience with both. And one of the things that I noticed about public school is that it just, if you go into typical public, and of course, I can only speak to my state. I can't I would be stepping out of line to say that the school system in Canada or elsewhere is this or that. No, but I can only tell you my experience. So what I've seen in the state of Texas, a typical public school system is completely different. And I understand you have to change with the times. I get it. Because if you stay stagnant, you're not going to grow. However, the reliance of some of this technology is just overwhelming, just for teachers too. I personally struggled on the whiteboards, and I'm somewhat proficient with technology. I'm no expert by any means or stretch of the imagination, but I even struggled with the whiteboards. I had to have
Mm-hmm.
teachers train me because I didn't, among all the other trainings that I had to do for my profession, I missed those whiteboard trainings. And it's not easy. And so you get these expensive pieces of equipment drawn on the board. You get rid of, first of all, I was using chalkboard, and then we segued to the dry erase boards. And then the dry erase boards now are a magnet for these big old expensive devices. And so I see the application in that. But one of the things that I noticed is that kids tune out. And then on top of that, they're given especially school districts that rely on what's called one-on-one learning, which every student will get a portable laptop device, Chromebook, as the case is for the older students. But one of the things I noticed is a lot of these kids are glued during the school instructional day. And then sadly at home, you don't know. That's the most disheartening part about this field is you don't know what the student goes home to. You don't know if he or she is glued again to the laptop. So I think there's definitely an over-reliance on technology. And I think something along the lines, I'm not a fan of extremes. I think you need to have, like Aristotle said, the golden medium, go right down the middle. Not too much of it and not too little. If you use too much of it, you get a lot of distraction problems. I mean, the research is out there. It's not just something anecdotal. And then if you go too far left, where you're just all about, okay, here, work on this worksheet, open your book, copy the answers, outline. I mean, that's boring. That's not worldly. That's not up to the 21st century either. So you have to be realistic about it, but you can't you can't have an over reliance on technology, even as adults. I think you just kind of segueing, you go have dinner in a restaurant and we have a no phone rule, no laptop or no iPad, no phones on the table. We're going to just talk. But what do you normally see? You look around and people are just glued to their phones, sadly.
Yes, I do see that. And that is a really dangerous avenue, I think, to go down. Everybody is absorbed in their phone. They're doing something on whatever, and they're not interacting with each other. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. I definitely agree with you that technology should be used. One of the biggest components of what we do as a company is teaching children digital literacy, right? Unless World War III happens, which, knock on wood, and God willing, it's not going to for the next few years at least, or ever, perhaps. I'm an optimist. But until World War III happens, the internet is here, right? You have to be able to learn how to use it and how to use it responsibly. That includes making sure that you have set timeframes, right? Relying on the internet for everything is not okay. I definitely encourage my students, and I know encourage our students, if you don't know something, we live in an age of information. It's okay to look it up. But the problem comes when you are looking up absolutely everything, when you know nothing. Rely on technology to tell you everything. That's another challenge that I see with the overuse of technology. Well, I need to know anything. I'll just look it up on Google. To the point, actually, where I see in students, and I see in students looking up very simple mathematical formulas and things like that, that they should be able to pull out of the knowledge from their hand, right? And I mean, yes, you obviously aren't expected to know everything, but the basics should be there, right? And the reliance on technology, I'll just look it up, or I don't need to remember that, I'll just look it up. That would be okay if you were filling your head with other useful sorts of things as well, right? But too often, I see that a lot of students, particularly in the high school age, turn to games, they turn to distractions, as you said. They turn to other sorts of entertainment that they are filling their head with. And I'm not saying, you're not allowed to have any fun, you're not allowed to watch anything, you're not allowed to, you have to live as someone who is, a monk and you're not influenced by any other influence. That's not what I'm saying. But if that's all that you're filling your head with, instead of learning about things and learning about the outside world, there becomes the problem, right? And I think that's sort of what you're saying as well, along the same lines.
Absolutely. And that, as you're saying all that, which I also agree with, is that's why that history lesson is so important. You actually take our son in that case to visit the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial or the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., or the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. I mean, those are experiences that he's going to hold for the rest of his life, as opposed to just seeing it on a screen. But actually, now, yes, there's a cost, and that's where, thankfully, that's where I would be pro technology is that for students who don't have, whose parents don't have the means to provide those actual real life experiences, there's a simple Google search. I mean, that's the buzzword. Again, if students just use it for gaming, which oftentimes and many times I had to talk to students because they weren't using technology responsibly. And
Mhm.
mind you, it's like, okay, well, this really isn't a counseling problem. It's more of the student's not is being defiant and decided to, because of boredom or whatever, wanted to look or play up games or look up an inappropriate site, which brings a whole different element to the misuse of technology. And nowadays, I feel sorry just for professors and teachers with the advent of Chat GPT. I mean,
That
that
is a
is great.
challenge, yes.
That is going to be a challenge, and as a small business owner, that is definitely saves me a lot of time. But again, I think the key in all of this, the overarching theme, is that technology, AI, should never replace critical thinking or the humanistic element of doing things. Because
Mhm.
one thing that technology can never do is provide that personal experience. But what ends up happening is people, or the generation who grew up on technology, they
Mhm.
don't know what it's like to be bored. They don't know what it's like to stare out of a car window in a long drive, to look at the clouds, to have that creativity, the self-expression, where I'm bored. Okay, here's the laptop. Okay, listen to this or watch this video. And
Yeah.
it's just constant. Your brain is just constantly going. And so that's why you have, in my opinion, why you have many, among other things, of course, but one of the many issues why students have sleeping problems is because oftentimes I remember counseling students and I ask, well, what time did you go to bed? 2 o'clock in the morning. What? And then my mom was like, are you serious? Or your parents don't pick up your technology? Nope. So again, the studies have shown that if you're looking at technology, adults included, before bedtime, you shouldn't do that because your brain is already alerted to stay awake. So that's going to
Mhm.
disrupt your sleep.
Yes. Yes, I know there's been lots of studies. I know there's been and there's been quite a few. There's been quite a few. I actually can't think of one study that's been done that shows the positive effects of technology use within a certain time frame before you go to bed. And I'm kind of the pot calling the kettle black here because I'm definitely guilty of staying on my
So am
computer
I. So am
and
I.
whatnot. But there's certain tools you can use, right? Like, I mean, I have blue light protection in my classes. I have blue light protection on my computer. It's always on the warm light setting. Um, and you find things that you can do to mitigate that. Um, and that being said, I mean, working on a computer, I think, is a little bit different from just zoning out and gaming or entertainment or what have you, right? Again, coming back to that idea of Chat GPT, and other AI advancements that are happening like on the daily. Um, you said something interesting. You said that it doesn't replace the humanistic tendencies. I had a student actually. Coincidentally, she's homeschooled. We went to homeschool family support. Um, and I don't remember what we were doing. We were brainstorming for something or other. And she happened to mention AI. And she said, I would never do that, Miss Kimberly, because I have a brain. Why would I use a computer's brain when I have my brain? And she's 16 years old. And
That's powerful.
I was like,
Wow.
this child, like, she just, because she realizes, the power of it. She realizes that it's good. It is good for certain things. It can shorten certain things. But why would I use that to come up with my ideas when I have a brain and I'm creative, right? That belief in herself that was fueled by just sheer confidence is amazing. And I think that that's another thing that we have to be very, very careful of with the advancement of technology, that you don't use it for all of your ideas, right? Which again furthers the theme of, and it comes back to the idea of you using technology and not technology using you.
Bingo. Absolutely. And even as you're saying that, first of all, that's powerful. The 16-year-old students would say that. And it just goes to show everyone, adults, because usually there it's all about, oh, these kids. Every generation blames the one before and
Of
vice
course.
versa.
Or the one after.
But exactly. But
Yeah.
that's where you can't make those generalizations and say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this generation is terrible. No, absolutely not. every generation, even within our own, is yeah, you're going to have your knuckleheads and you're going to have your students who or adults who are still act like children, and vice versa. But that is powerful. And as you're saying that, I remember going into when I was actually doing on-site counseling, I would go into the classrooms and I would tell the students, you know what? Forget your laptops, put those down. You own the best supercomputer. And they looked at me like, what? I said, yeah, it's inside your head. It's called your brain. Use it.
Mm-hmm.
And it clicked. And it's so true because I said, yeah, because your brain, it lives those experiences, what things that technology can't do.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's kind of the overall theme. And I was going to ask you, what would your solution be if you could talk to parents, whether these children are homeschooled or whether they're in regular academic school, what would be your solution to this kind of overuse of technology and this kind of constant need for stimulation? I think we talked about quite a few of them already, right? Setting limits, allowing your kids to be bored. I know that you said that one. Like that's a big one. That is a big one.
yeah,
That's when your creative juices flow, right? And again, I am guilty of this. I am learning this myself. I need to take time to just do nothing, let my brain wander, read a book, do something other than working. Because when you're allowing yourself to be creative, you get those. That's when you get those ideas, and you get further along in doing things when you allow yourself a bit of a break, right?
yeah, absolutely. And even with my son, when we deny him or we tell him, and that's another thing, parents, you can tell your kids no, the bad
Oh,
word. And my
oh,
son, my son will I say, yeah, growing up, the joke is, what did your dad call you? No. It's like, no, it's okay to say no. You can't use you
yeah.
can't use the iPad today. So what's he doing right now? He was on the iPad earlier, but now he's playing with his Hot Wheels and he's doing creative play. He's playing and he's talking and he's a social butterfly. So he's doing that creative play, which he's not glued to an iPad and he's having fun. Just
Mhm.
kind of like the way it always was before the iPads came into the foray.
Setting limits and boundaries, I
That's
think is
key.
really important. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's awesome. Sounds like you guys have a good thing going. Either
we
do I.
do. Yeah,
Yeah.
and speaking a little bit briefly about the way that the structure is set up with the homeschool program. So we rely on some traditional workbooks, but we also there is technology involved. But here's another one: movement. Where
Hmm.
when I help my wife, I do okay. Let's do some sit-ups. And how many sit-ups are you going to do now? Let's count backwards. If I take two sit-ups away, how many are you doing now? So using just the movement, the song, the expression, and hitting all the kinesthetic senses, all the different learning styles,
Yeah.
it really helps, as opposed to just being glued to an iPad the way that most of instruction is done in my
Hmm.
experience, or back when I was in school, it's like, okay, break out your textbook, open up to page 25 and do questions
Lesson
one through three.
34.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yes.
oh, geez, on those
Yeah.
hard wooden desks. No, thank
Yeah.
you.
I know one of the very positive things about homeschooling and being that we design curriculum and teach curriculum and support parents in homeschooling their homeschooling journey. One of the beautiful things that a lot of parents don't realize is that you and your wife have obviously figured out at this point is that you can customize your methodology and your delivery of instruction, and you can vary that. You have to teach your child, academically, you want your child to know certain concepts. You want your child to be academically on par with students who, with public school kids, but you
Right.
also are able to tailor that information to them in a way that they are interested in. So there's really no excuse for them not to be interested in what you're doing. Now, there are certain things that they may or may not be good at, that every
Sure.
child has their strengths and weaknesses, just like every adult, right? But the point
Right.
being, you can tailor it to them and deliver it in a way that is conducive and that is encouraging and engaging for them.
Exactly. Now, the only limitation that I see, which really isn't a limitation, it is a limitation, which I will give credit to the public school system, is that they do have testing. If you suspect
Mm-hmm.
that a student has a learning disability, that is definitely something that is detrimental to the homeschooling population is that you actually, and I think we did this last year through his private school, we actually had to go to the zoned school district public school to get the LSSP, which is the licensed school psychologist, to do testing on him, just for some basic reading comprehension. So that's what I would say would be a limitation of homeschooling, is
Mm-hmm.
trying to find the testing if you suspect, and even if you don't suspect, because many homeschool parents, depending on their backgrounds, may not have the proper education or adequate education to say, oh, I suspect that my son or daughter has a learning disability, but let's find out if he or she truly does.
Right. And so being able to find that support. But
Exactly.
that's great to know that there is support. I know there are different programs out there. There are different homeschooling support programs as well, that will enable you to do that. But that raises a really good point. And that's something I say all the time is if you are homeschooling or if you are involved in a homeschooling aspect with your children, you have to have a tribe, you have to have a community, and you have to have a network, because there are not because you're a horrible parent or you can't do it
Sure.
all. You probably can do it all, but do you want to put all of that responsibility on yourself? Right? Finding like-minded people that are also able to support you, I think, is really, really crucial. Even more so when you're homeschooling than when your child is in public school.
Absolutely, which speaks to the point that my wife and I are on social media homeschooling groups, and we definitely ask
Mm-hmm.
questions if we ever have questions, and that's the support there. But we've also been fortunate at our local trampoline park to say, oh, okay, they must be homeschooling because it's 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, and there are kids our son's age, and so we collaborate with the parents and we share resources. So
Awesome.
that provides a good blend of the virtual aspect of it
Yeah.
and the real life in person, let's speak to each other and help each other out aspect of
Mm-hmm.
it.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Thank you so much. So much. I really appreciate you coming on, Francisco. I appreciate, all your insights and your experience and your expertise. Thank you for your time, and for your energy. Thank you for being here today.
And thank you very much, Kimberly. And I appreciate all that you're doing with your program and your venture also. And I love how your backdrop says teaching children how to think, not what to
Not
think.
what you
So
think.
that's
That's right,
awesome.
sir.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
very much. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that is all for this week's episode of The Parent Solution. If you have any comments or questions, either about this challenge or others that have come up for you, you can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you, as always, so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.